Here we are yet again with another crypto dip. We've gone from pure bullishness all the way down to bearishness. We've seen Bitcoin and Ethereum retrace quite heavily. And if you look at altcoins, well, it's a sea of red everywhere. So we're going to tell you just how long is this dip going to last. We're going to take a look at some charts to give you guys some reassurance here, because in my opinion, this is just a temporary dip, as we've seen time and time before. So if you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you stay up to date with crypto, as well as smash the like button. And let's talk about this dip and just how long do I see it last. One of the indicators I absolutely enjoy looking at is the fear and greed index when the market starts dipping. Right now, we can see that it's at 53, which is essentially neutral. But if you take a look at just last week, literally 7 days ago or even 6 days ago, we were right around 68, which was actually in the greed criteria, where Bitcoin was around $124,000. So in the last 6 days, Bitcoin has fallen about $10,000, and we can see that the fear and greed index has gone from 68 to 53, so from greed to basically neutral. And if you're scrolling crypto Twitter, or if you're looking at the space in general, people have gone from, being very bullish all the way down to now saying that that may have been the top, just what we saw over the last week. Now, the funny thing is, if you really think of it, last week, if we go back to this chart here, last week when, Bitcoin was at 124,000 making new all-time highs, and you had the fear and greed index in the greed level around 68, you could tell that everybody was bullish and everyone wanted to buy absolutely everything at this point, because there was FOMO in the space and people were scared of missing out. So they were okay with buying absolutely everything. But now, since we're in a neutral fear and greed index, Bitcoin has dropped $10,000. Ethereum has dropped quite substantially as well. And altcoins have dropped. Now it's pure panic in the space. But again, if you switch your brain to really understand what's happening here, it's much better to buy in the fear area, or when the market is neutral, rather than when the market is greedy or euphoric. If you master that, you're going to be well okay for this bull market. Now, if we even go a step further in this fear and greed indicator, let me show you the last 6 years of data for fear and greed. It is quite interesting to see, because every time we have Bitcoin dipping, the fear and greed index also dips, and soon after there is a rally in the market, and especially in a bull market, we've seen this time and time again. So if you look at fear and greed index, let's start off with, July 2022. We're not going to go back all the way to 2019, because at that point it's a different cycle. But if we start with July 2022, you can see that the fear and greed index for the market was in the ultimate extreme fear. And we can also see that this coincides with Bitcoin dipping around $20,000. Now, soon after, there is a bit of a rally on Bitcoin, and then we see what happens towards the late parts of 2022. Again, extreme fear in the market, and we have the bear market lows here for Bitcoin. But again, if you buy the dip here, sure, it's not the ultimate dip on Bitcoin. If you buy the dip yet again when it's, extreme fear, well, soon after you can see that that was in fact the bear market low, and then the price of Bitcoin starts going up and up and up. And it's not before, the later parts of 2023 where we once again find ourselves in the extreme fear category. And again, that was basically a 6-month consolidation for Bitcoin. And then it goes on another rally, and we see that people get greedy, probably get wrecked here because you're buying the top. And then again, another dip on Bitcoin, go back to the extreme fear. And you can see that this is a local dip in Bitcoin. And once again, we are off to the races on Bitcoin's price. So I just wanted to highlight this because this happens time and time again. And if you look at the price of Bitcoin, Well, even though we're at $113,000 at the time of me recording this video, we are still in a macro uptrend for Bitcoin. If you look at this on a weekly chart, you can see that we are still making higher lows as Bitcoin is continuing upwards. And in my opinion, it is going to continue doing this as we get into Q4. And I do believe the top is going to be sometime in Q4. So if you just look again at some of the dips that we've had over the last few months, if you're panicking on this dip yet again, let's take a look at this April 2024 dip. You can see that from the top of April all the way to the bottom of, right around August, we had a dip of about 32% on Bitcoin. If you look at this next one here from December 2024 all the way down to April 2025, you had another 30%-ish dip on Bitcoin. If we take a look at what happened just recently in May all the way to the beginning or end of June, you have another 12% dip on Bitcoin. And right now, if we take a look at what's currently happening, well, it is about a 9% dip on Bitcoin. So all this to say is that we have seen dips happen like this from time to time. And every time that there is a dip, there is another rally that happens soon after. Now, if you look at what Ben Cohen is saying on Twitter, and again, if you're not following Ben Cohen on Twitter, highly recommend you do so. But Ben has basically said that this is likely going to go back to the bull market support band. He's talking about the price of Bitcoin here going back to roughly the 21 weekly EMA or the 20-week moving average. If we look at those charts on TradingView, you can also plot these for yourselves on your own charts. And if we look at this, it gives exactly what we had. So back in this 6-month consolidation period, we had Bitcoin's price come back in between these, bull market support bands, which is again the 21-week EMA or the 20-week moving average. We have it yet again in April and March here. It actually dipped a little bit below these lines. And right now we could see Bitcoin come back to, let's say, 107,000 if that were the case. And ultimately speaking, this would still make a higher low for Bitcoin before continuing on upwards into Q4 this year. So that is still my narrative. And if you switch gears and take a look at what's happening with Bitcoin dominance, well, Bitcoin dominance is now at 60.08%. And as we all know, we had a very critical level on a Bitcoin dominance, which was right around 60.3%, which does coincide with previous levels of support as well as resistance. So if Bitcoin dominance comes back up here and, finds support on this level, then continues back up, that is one possible scenario. Hopefully that doesn't happen. The ideal scenario for altcoins would be that it would come back here and actually just shoot down and Bitcoin dominance would continue falling. But historically speaking, what usually happens in September is that we have more dominance on Bitcoin because Bitcoin actually gains on the markets in September, historically speaking. So we're going to have to wait and see exactly what happens in September. But historically speaking, if you look at Bitcoin, it does retrace in September. And if you look at it in the 2021 cycle, post-halving year, so in 2021, obviously, the halving was in 2020. You can see that Bitcoin did pull back in September and it pulled back to those bull market bands. So again, historically speaking, we could have something similar than 2021. And if we go back all the way to 2017, you can also see the very same thing here. We have a local top in August and in September, it actually comes back to the bull market bands. And then we have, a massive end of Q4 into that post-halving year. So in my opinion, right now, we are, just getting around the August pump, getting into September, the dump, and then in the rest of Q4, so October, November, December, we should have this, last phase of the bull market and hopefully new all-time highs for Bitcoin as well as some altcoins. But now if we switch gears and we look at Ethereum, what's been happening with ETH is very interesting because now it is the first time that we are back into this range here around 3,900 all the way to 4,100. And that green box, which we have highlighted on this screen, shows the massive resistance that we had over the last few months. So as we all know, we weren't able to break above this level for quite some time. This dates back to March 2024. We tried time and time again to break this resistance, and every time we entered that price range, we actually weren't able to go above it until just recently, where Ethereum broke out of it, but now never really retested that range as support. So if we take a look at what's currently happening here, this is really the first time that we're going back into this green box, and hopefully speaking, what happens is that this resistance that lasted so long where Ethereum wasn't able to break above turns into support, meaning that this area now should hold as a demand zone, looking at people willing to buy at these levels, because before people were holding this level because it was a multi-year resistance spot, but hopefully that turns into support. And if it does, obviously it'd be bullish for Ethereum and it would stop the bleeding for some altcoins right now. Now, if you are having a hard time dealing with all of what's happening in crypto, just think of the people buying Ethereum right now. There are millions of dollars being poured into Ethereum on a day-to-day basis. Sure, we may have a few days of negative outflows for Ethereum ETFs or companies not buying as much, but ultimately speaking, the amount of accumulation for Ethereum that has happened over the last few months has been quite impressive, and it continues to do so. If you look at what's just happening over the last few days, if you look at public companies on August 18th, they essentially purchased 370,000 Ethereum. This is one company, this is Bitmine, and then you have Sharpling Gaming purchasing 140,000 ETH, and this is just, millions and millions of dollars worth of Ethereum. And looking at how much these companies own, we're talking about billions of dollars of Ethereum, which have all been purchased in the last few days, last few weeks, and last few months. So if you're thinking that this, small dip on Ethereum, which is warranted after the crazy run up that it's had, coming back to some key levels to hopefully hold, turn that previous resistance into support. If you think that that is not warranted and that's the end of the bull market, I unfortunately don't share the same opinion as you. But again, nobody has a crystal ball and nobody can tell you with certainty what's going to happen. Although what I can tell you that's going to happen as this is all unfolding is that your altcoins are going to continue to get wrecked. And you can see by looking at crypto bubbles that it's an absolute sea of red for the day. If we go over the last week, it is a bit of a mixed bag. If we go over the last month, again, a bit of a mixed bag. You have some coins doing better than others, such as Link and Aerodrome that we've talked about so many times on the channel. But again, if you go back to the basics and you look at what's happening with altcoins versus Ethereum, it's going to give you a good idea of what they are doing right now. And if we look at this relationship, well, we can see that Ethereum has actually been outperforming altcoins ever since April. So as this comes down here, this basically demonstrates that Ethereum has outperformed altcoins. But just over the last few days, we've actually seen Ethereum do worse than altcoins, not by a whole lot. But ultimately speaking, altcoins are gaining a bit on Ethereum here, which shows that Ethereum is actually falling much harder than altcoins over the last few days. Now, of course, it's altcoin dependent, but we do have some leaders, some laggers. We've talked about that in previous videos, but this is the macro scale of what's happening with altcoins, is that they are still slowly but surely lagging to Ethereum. And I do believe that that is going to continue until we really start seeing Bitcoin dominance come down and altcoins gain more momentum. But that may not happen until the very start of Q4, because if September is historically what it is, where Bitcoin kind of comes down, Ethereum is likely going to come down as Bitcoin does, well, your altcoins are unfortunately not going to rally if the market comes down. Now, in September, we still have positive rate cuts that should be continuing to happen. If you look at the current odds, we have 86% in September of a rate cut. We have another 46% in October and another 37% in December. So we could potentially have 2 to 3 rate cuts by the end of Q4, which again would promote global liquidity, and that would obviously benefit altcoins. I do think we need a couple rate cuts before we really see altcoins go crazy. But that is the game plan that I'm following, and these market moves that we're seeing, Bitcoin dip 10%, Ethereum dip 10% in a matter of a few days aren't really doing too much to me personally, because I'm sticking to my strategy. I still believe the top is going to be sometime in Q4 of 2025. Public companies are still pouring millions of dollars into Ethereum as well as Bitcoin, and altcoins are just slowly but surely lagging behind, and there is going to be a point in time where that liquidity rotates into those altcoins. So with that being said, if you are scared right now of the dips, ask yourself if you're over leveraged, over invested. Why are you having these emotions? Because ultimately speaking, crypto is risky, and if you're too invested in it, it may be a perfect time to deleverage yourself. And of course, you have to always keep in mind that you shouldn't invest money that you can't afford to lose. So with that being said, I'm going to leave you off what Warren Buffett once said: be greedy when others are fearful. Right now, people are fearful, and be fearful when other people are greedy. So I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll catch you guys in my next video. Peace.